Hey, what's happening? This is a different kind of video today. This is Sean the Rickman reporting to you live from my home studio here in Rockville, Maryland, Zone 1. I'm working on my fourth album due out soon, where I'm playing everything. I'm playing the guitars, the bass, wrote all the music, the drums, singing everything, blah, blah, blah. All right. So, speaking of albums, I often get asked, how come you're not this household name? How come you're not famous? How come you never went for this? Blah, 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 blah. Well, I did. I did all that. Back in 1990, I signed a deal with a small label called Third Stone, and they got distribution from Atlantic. That's what was happening back then. These were in the days of Interscope and Sony and all of these other labels that were happening back then. Maverick, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so record company never did anything with me because they were stupid. However, I got a publishing deal from Warner Chappell. They advanced me $60,000 over 2 years, which was wonderful, non-recoupable, which was a miracle because I showed a lot of promise. I had 60 songs at the time. I was this 19-year-old kid, recorded everything on 4-track. They were like, this guy can do something. He's a workhorse. But they blew it. But in my favor, I'll tell you, because you should own everything and do everything yourself. These days, we have the means to buy gear and do this stuff. Raise the capital that it takes to record your own music and build your own art. That way you own everything. And then you'll be able to license it to other places where you can bring in more capital to pay for your band members or musicians if you need them, to pay for studio costs, to pay for real estate, to pay for the travel, the gas, even renting the venues, to pay, get your own PR, which is promotion, get your own booking agents, your own management, do everything yourself, merchandising. These record companies are taking merchandise now, okay? So a lot of these people that you see on television doing these things, they're not making the money like you think they are. That's all a put on. Back in the day, they had, MTV Cribs, where they would take these kids that had modest hits. They weren't even around that long. And they would walk you through their mansions with their big cars and all their toys and all that. All of that was bullshit. That was all bought by the record company to make a promotional video so that you would buy into that type of brainwashing. They didn't live in those houses. They didn't own those things. It's a television show, and they call it reality TV now, and it's not even that scripted. Don't believe the hype, right? That's what they used to say. So to better explain what I'm talking about, let's listen to some experts. My former bandmate and good buddy, Janek Gwizdala, none other than Van Halen, and we're going to end it with Prince. These are clips that I put together explaining the same old thing, and you hear it from the horse's mouth. You're going to learn something today. You're going to learn today.
I really don't know why record labels still exist. I'm kind of shocked by it. They used to get X amount of dollars for a budget, and they'd be able to go in the studio and do all this stuff, and it was like fronted, but then you don't own your master and you're kind of in debt to the record label afterwards. Like, you have to recoup all of that money. But say they gave you $100,000 to make a record and you spent the whole $100,000 making the record. You've then got to sell enough of them to recoup that money to get to zero, to then get into your shitty 13 to 18% on sales or whatever they give you or gave you. It's a platinum record and it's his most successful thing, but every time it got used, like in a product placement or sync licensing or something, the record label still owned the master and took the lion's share of whatever money was being made 40 years after it was recorded or something, 30, 40 years after it was recorded. And so because he doesn't own the master, so he can't make 100% of the sync licensing royalties. They took 85% or some crazy number. There was no 50-50 split. Also, record labels kind of were the gatekeepers and held all the keys and all the cards. Everyone basically from that era is in debt to their record label. Now, it's not a debt you have to pay off. It's a debt, it's a risk the label assumes on your behalf. You just pay into that debt. Basically, if they give you $100,000 to make a record, they're just going to be taking every penny of profit and sales you make until long after you're dead, because you just never pay it back. So a lot of people like that, and it's not just jazz people, there's pop people as well. I know people who are like, made records and went on tour and even had small hits and are like $400,000 in the hole to their label still years later, decade later, 5 years later, 20 years later, because the album just never recouped. And then of course you make that transition from sales to streaming, and your streaming numbers have to be so gargantuan to really see a recoup on that, I think, these days. So yeah, very, very interesting.
What was our original recording deal on records? Because most people don't really know what happens behind records. What's really,
I know what they called it. They called it a Motown deal, which was an 11-point deal. That we didn't find out until much later. That a point is 1%, not of 100%, but 1% of 90%. And the basis for that came from, in the old days when 78s were delivered, upon delivery, approximately 10% of the product broke. So they paid you on 90% of the delivery. So you're not getting paid on a buck. You're getting paid on 90 cents. 1 penny out of 90 pennies is a point, basically. Okay? Now, we had an 11-point deal, and 3 points went to Ted, our producer.
The producer.
Okay. Ted still makes more money than I do on those first 2
Oh, yeah,
records.
he makes more than all of us. Okay, so that leaves 8. Out of the 8, we had to pay agents, attorneys.
Well, the whole thing was a loan. It was like an 18% loan.
Yeah, but I mean, the band, if I remember right, got to split, I think, 3 points by the time we were done.
I think we split $1.15 between the 4 of us.
And don't forget.
And then paid for everything.
But don't forget the weekly check of $83.83. Because Dave and I went to City National Bank in the heart of financial district. What is it?
Century City.
Century City. And we walked in the way we dress, and of course everyone there wears suits and ties. So immediately we walk in with a check, and the woman looks at us and went, hold on, I better check the signature card here. So the woman looks at us and she goes, oh, excuse me, I'll be right back. And you see her huddling with some other people looking at a signature card. And finally Dave and I went, hey, excuse me, can we see that card? And lo and behold, besides the 4 band members' names on it, there was an attorney's name, there was our manager's name, and
half a dozen other, the 3 Stooges, Darth Vader.
Now, what a bunch of idiots.
Yoda.
Because they were ripping us off at a time when we were only making $83.83 a week.
And then it went from bad to worse.
Yeah, we toured for a year, and they still owed $1 million or something like that.
We owed $1 million. We went platinum. We toured for a year. We came back, and Warner Brothers. Can I mention that Warner Brothers told us that we owed them $2 million.
And on top of that, we owed them another record.
Yeah.
And it was the end of the year. We had three weeks to deliver another record.
So I went to Ted and I said, Ted, let me get something straight here. We sold 1 million records. We toured for a year, and we owe you guys $2 million. So if we had done 10 records and sold 10 million records, we would have owed you $20 million? Right? And he kind of looks at me and goes, Why
are we doing this? And on top of that, it was a two record a year deal. So we had 3 weeks to record another record, and boom, we went straight out on tour again. The first record took about a week to 7 days to do. The second record took about 3 weeks to do, because that's all we had. We had to deliver that record before the year end.
I think it's kind of like the difference between a play and a movie. You know, a play has the whole story. It has everything that you need to tell a story, and it's over from the time when it starts to when it ends. But the preparation for it, or that compared to a movie, which is the same as making a record, is a lot more involved because they can. You know, we can now take 2 days to listen to the kick drum, and that's what they do. That's what happens. It's a very different rhythm. The way records were made, depending on when you were looking at. The 80s was a specific time, the 90s was a specific time, but the band always did its best when we were just allowed to walk in and play, you know, and record the band while they're playing. So it was like a snapshot of the time.
So what has changed, really? It's like Wolfie, Alex, and I, we play at the same time. I solo on the same track, generally.
All of my vocals,
nothing's really changed.
Everything that you actually
blame the guys behind the window.
Everything that you spend money on for my vocal is first and third version. Virtually everything I sell for a living is within the first 3 takes. I've done 27 takes, but inevitably everybody
the ones you
goes,
end up using are usually the first ones.
Before you think yourself past genius, you got a good question there. What does take? It's just more efficient technically, yo.
You know, like Mariah Carey just had this big $20 million. That's like a huge deal, right?
So you feeling that?
No, Well, what I mean, I don't understand. What the public sees the word $20 million an album. Well,
let's see. Do you all think that's a good deal?
Well, I mean, tell me why. I mean, what am I missing?
Okay, let's do some math.
Okay.
If
you do math like that?
Yeah, kinda. If you sign me,
Okay.
you sign me to a record company
Right.
or a record deal, let's suppose you have a record company.
Right.
How much would you give me? The album sells for $18, right? $18.
Whatever, yeah.
All right. How much of that would you give me?
Well, I don't know how it works.
Well, no.
Half?
Half? Half sound good?
Yeah.
All right. Check this out. If I sell 1 million copies, I'm gonna have $10 million, right? Roughly $10 million.
Right.
If I sell 2 million copies, I got $20 million.
Right.
If I just sell 3 million copies, I got $30 million. Now who has the biggest record deal?
Oh, I see. Yeah, right. Okay.
Right?
Right.
So Mariah kind of got screwed.
Really?